Hi, everyone. Hope you all having this phenomenal time here at Rise Observe conference with this incredible view towards the Pacific Oceans. And also this phenomenal panelists we were able to curate for this discussion today. My name is Hira Dangol. I work for Bank of America and I lead AI, ML, and automation team. So our topic has been kind of like very interesting, as you can imagine, right? Why the trust is important in today's world, as you are preparing to fully moving from this POC stage to production deployment of like, you call it like generative AI, large language model based solutions, or things we have been doing for the years, which is traditional AI systems like MLOps, right? So we'll be spending next 20, 30 minutes around these topics, taking you this kind of journey from the insights view with this incredible panelist. We'll also spend some time towards the end to potentially take questions, either through Slido or you can directly stand up to have a question. So I'm joined by here like incredible research from the Anthropic, Soheil, and then we have Jonathan, from the Innodata, and then finally we have Prateek from the CCCIS. So with that, I'll get started with some kind of like this classic, icebreaker questions, which I love to ask around, like, especially around this topic of architecting trust. So starting with Sel, what does trust mean to you personally, and the trust mean from the generative AI and or the traditional ML system perspective?
Yeah, I think for me, trust is about communication. That's what we all do when we're talking to AI assistants. But having an assistant that can communicate in a timely manner with you, be able to provide sources for its information, and be able to reason with you in a way that is understandable, I think is really important. And that applies to both people and AI assistants.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, of course, trust means that, like, it's not something that's a black box. There has to be some type of, shared assumptions, communication. In the context of AI, I think a good place to start are the three H's as a framework. So honesty, helpfulness, and harmlessness. I think there has to be some approach to the problem, some way to think about it. And I think the reason why I like the three H's is that, it can be granular or broad in scope. So I like that as a place to start.
Yeah. So trust is a legal entity that a government can, I'm sorry, I thought you meant personally, right? So I guess we're not aligned here. Talking about alignment, alignment is actually a key part of trust, right? So having shared values where we both can agree on, and that is part of building the foundation for trust. This last week, I was spending time with my 3-year-old nephew, and I was wondering how kids think about trust, right? Other than, being nice to them or playing with them. And what I discovered was it's a lot about familiarity and consistency, right? So a 3-year-old may not remember all the contacts and connections we had, but they're going to see you all the time and learn to depend on you, and consistency builds trust. So that's the foundation. And I would like to add one more thing to that. So I'm an engineer by training. I think a lot of us are here. So when we work with complex systems, understanding, being familiar with the system, being able to push the limits of the system, in order to do that, you have to be able to understand the system, the complexity of it, know the limits of it, and that also is, to me, is part of trust.
Awesome. Thank you, Prateek. I think now moving into more like uncovering some insights related to perhaps the current state of challenges, right? That's where we can focus on. Perhaps many of teammates here or on the audience side might be moving from. this kind of the journey, right? Adapting and building orchestration layer and building apps on top of that and productionizing, right? I think with this architecture, kind of the need when it comes to trust, where do you see the challenge you have seen in your general kind of use cases? Maybe on Jonathan, you might have some inside view from the potential real world.
Sure. Well, we started the day talking about guardrails. That's of course on the list. Scale, not just in terms of like an individual modeler itself, but there's so many things in the marketplace. There's a lot of things happening. It's hard to keep on top of. And for me, though, the thing that really gets me thinking about this topic is multimodal data. So I see that as a big challenge in the sense that, when you just have text, it's one set of challenges, but you have more tools in your toolkit as a bad actor if you can use images, if you can use video, if you can combine these different data modalities to exploit vulnerabilities in models. So what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. One thing I'd love to see more from models is their ability to like understand their own lack of understanding, having them have better self-reflection. They're, in the initial stages trained to be like a parrot and just repeat what they've seen. They're not trained to, at least early on, to understand the limitations of their own knowledge. So I think that's like one challenge that we want to address, is to have models that are better able to understand that and share that information with you, as opposed to hallucinating, as what we're seeing now.
Maybe, Prateek, I'll add some more question. I think from the current state of value, like, where we are at this point of time from certain kind of the readiness, like the success factor and the failure, right? So that could be something if you have pursued the integration of the trust architecture, the need of the responsible AI component in there. So do you have any examples like that you can share where you have fully integrated this kind of workflow while you're building and deploying the AI solutions in production state? Any success story? Or if you have a certain kind of the failure kind of the view, right, where you learn something out of that, maybe because you're ready to deploy and then there is a whole risk team is coming into play that there is certain kind of requirements, it's still not ready, and you can't put the deployments in the production state yet. So any examples would be helpful for us to navigate further up there.
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of use cases we're seeing where you can integrate human in the loop, and that helps alleviate and capture a lot of the issues or challenges we see with generative models. So prime example, we see are in the cases of like hybrid intelligence, where human and the machine can work together. So we're seeing like a emergence of co-pilots rather than autopilots. So there are cases, we're seeing like responses to email have like being high satisfaction rates, or like logo design, or even like YouTube thumbnail clips design. Those are very much like successful cases. They can have low impacts to the risk that are associated with it, and human can oversee it and correct it pretty quickly. Other use cases that we have seen is like narrowing the use case, right? So don't try to solve for all the edge cases. If you can narrow it down to like a set of principles or set of key objectives that you're trying to achieve, you don't have to have like open-ended questions. Like you can prompt the user with like predefined questions, for example, if you're working on a chatbot, and that can help narrow down like the hallucinations and the bias and things like that.
Maybe Jonathan, and I'll come back with the same question.
So it seems like the bar is pretty high, right? I mean, there's a lot of public attention on this issue, and of course, this is, responsible AI, at least from my personal view, is something that should be like intrinsic to model development. I mean, we should be thinking about these things when we try to develop these type of technologies. And I mean, because something is new, people might not fully understand it yet. And so I think at least in the public sphere, there's like a fear factor. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here is like, you know, how do you define that use case, but at the same time, you know, find a balance between like innovation and pushing things forward, but then also like, you know, speaking, you know, at least acknowledging the public's interest and concern side by side. So anyway, it's a very broad problem.
Yeah, so maybe like some specific examples if you have seen on this kind of like, you know, success deployment, right? Or maybe failure deployment where they learned something out of that could be helpful to share.
Yeah, I think like when we talk to our customers, the thing that helps them out in terms of evaluating whether a deployment is successful or not is having good evaluations in the first place. And I'm a big fan of evaluations in general. Like I think if you're going to, it actually forces you to understand what you're trying to do. Like if your first thing is to create an eval, that forces you to figure out, okay, what do I care about? What don't I care about? How do I know if I'm succeeding? How do I know if I'm not? And a lot of times people fail because they're creating an overly ambitious testing. Okay, they're creating an overly ambitious solution that's not solving a very specific situation. So the failures come from having like underspecified problem. So I think having good evaluation is really important for that. And then you can create trust because you can see if your solution is actually improving or getting worse over time. You have predictability in when you throw something out there that it's going to act the way that you expected it to. So I think having good evals can help with reducing the number of failures in deployment, but also ensuring trust in what you're getting out there.
All right, thank you. So now going into more like reversing back a little bit on the challenge aspect, right? Is it more like a technical limitation we see, or it's more like ethical challenges, right? In terms of deploying this kind of trustworthy solutions or workflow into the that aligns to the deployment of this large language model solution in production state, right? So where do you see this kind of the line that's drawing up to understand that, you know, when it comes to customer who's building those kind of the solution and system in production, I think, you know, there is a fundamental distribution path which we have seen customer directly going to large language model provider versus the distribution channels we have seen through the cloud provider, right? That gives some kind of the, some security or the scalable way to securely deploy those kind of the models in production state. So coming back to, I think, the limitation, do you see more like a technical limitation, or it's still like, no, we're not ready yet with this kind of the standards that needs to be built, aligned to the regulatory state? So where do you see that kind of the evolving state coming into play right now?
Yeah, I think, you know, from someone who's working on LLMs, like ethical considerations is something that comes up often. We try our best to ensure that our data is representative, it reduces bias. So I think like there's ethical implications of AI for society as a whole. So it's definitely something that I think about often. I think for many customers or for many businesses, that is a smaller percentage of the challenges they're running into today, because most of the time they need a LLM to do something very specific, like respond to, let's say they're building a coding agent, they need it to get the code right. So I think that it definitely does come up, but it doesn't come up so much in customers who are trying to drive specific technical applications. For them, it's much more of a technical problem.
Jonathan?
So I wonder though, like how, to what extent, like, so yes, we have these ethical questions with the model and the development of the technology, but to a certain extent, like, I think there's some responsibility outside of that, and it's on the user, of course, and like also anyone that like develops a downstream application. So it's like, just to, I don't know, introduce some type of devil's advocate viewpoint, or just to pose the question to the group, like, I mean, how much responsibility is incumbent on the model developer? I think some. You mentioned it. We have to be thinking about bias, fairness, diversity. But at what point does that stop and it becomes the responsibility of how the technology is used and what is developed as a consequence of it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you bring up, right? To Hira's question first, I think it's a little bit of both, but also developers are responsible for it, because I personally think that GenAI should have a responsible component to it, to build trust. And I can bring up one example that I heard is a recent airline chat application app gave wrong information to a user about a bereavement policy. And so the user, when tries to apply for a discount, the discount was rejected. And this is like the same company that's building and deploying the chat application. So I think there are enough tools out there where we can limit the scope of the hallucination and to some extent, and those should be used responsibly because these things can evolve into and the usages cannot be constrained once it's out in the open as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's things that are reasonably achievable, like source attribution or fact checking, or at least like maybe some type of confidence score when someone asks a technical question, or an information-based question. So I think there's something that can be done there.
One thing I'll add is kind of humorous is that models are really like a reflection of us and humanity as a whole. Like they have the same biases that the people on the internet do, which is like a bad, and there's a bad side to it, which is, okay, humans have a lot of problems, and that we have to sort of almost steer the models away from them. It can also work in the other way. Like if you train a model on the internet and you tell it, hey, you're Claude, it'll behave differently than if you tell it you're ChatGPT versus you're some other model, because it knows, well, this model is a little bit more apologetic, so I should be more apologetic. So we should never blame the models. All they want to do is learn. They just want to emulate. But it also gives us an opportunity to sort of take the best of us, take the best of humanity, and put that into a model that is almost like the gold standard for how we would want us to behave. And it's cool because we can't change ourselves fundamentally. We can change society and culture, but we can design like AI systems that sort of uphold the values that we really want an intelligent assistant to have, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. And even I'm glad that we're having this discussion in the AI capital, right? Enough tools and products are built out here. If perhaps someone might be starting his ideas right now somewhere else within this proximity of 50 miles radius. The point, I think we're talking about the challenge and opportunities out there as we look forward, kind of the view, right? I think we got 5 minutes, but I'll try to give some kind of like a nuances, right? So there is a whole piece of the architecting discussion. We are talking about the trustworthiness, right? Where do you see that trustworthiness architecture solutions or the features needs to be built? Is that going to be more like on an application layer, right? Would that be within the model function itself? Or would that be more like I would just do like advanced RAG or the fine tune, or within like prompt optimization phase, right? So where do you see that's coming into play as a best practices as of today, right? Across the industry, maybe on the customer end that you have seen?
So two things Anthropic cares about at a high level when it comes to trust. Like one is having models that can cite and can give you information about where they got their information. I think that makes you trust the model a bit more when you can see where it got its information from. So that as a UX and high-level feature, I think is pretty important, and it can be integrated into products. Like if you have a RAG application, you should have the model tell you where it got its information that it's outputting. So that's, I think, a functional piece that can make models a lot more trustworthy. The second is making models better at self-reflection, and what I mentioned earlier about understanding their own limits. You can actually tell Claude, hey, after you finish your output, like reflect on it a little bit and see if there's anything you would change to improve it. And often it can come up with, yeah, actually, I think this needs to be changed. Or when I did that search query, I don't think I specified this enough. And I think that sort of behavior can also help improve the model's like reliability over time by giving it a few more, a bit more of an ability to iterate as opposed to just get everything right on the first go.
I think that's really cool. I think on one hand, though, there's still the regulation piece. Like, I think there's some subset of users of the technology that will want some type of formal regulation. So I think there will be like some role of public policy. I think it's going to be a little bit of a push and pull. We saw that with social media, right? And I think about when search engines were developed and like the questions that were asked around that time. I mean, I think we're facing some of the same issues. So maybe there's a parallel there.
Yeah, I think it has to be a multi-layered approach, right? Starting from cleaning your data, knowing where the data is coming from, removing noise. That's very important. Filtering out any kind of PII information that can be part of that, or it can be hallucinated. Making sure you take special care for numerical data, right? Because we know that's a challenge for LLMs and other generative models. And then at the layer above that, while you're planning and architecting your solution, you have to be able to modularize your problem into smaller objective components so they're easy to validate, right? And when you can validate them, you can filter them out using guardrails or other applications. And then after that, I think you still have to leverage, ground your data either. There's multiple RAG techniques or frameworks, graph RAG, or if you have a knowledge base and things like that. And then the final piece is if you can incorporate human at the loop or at the helm, if possible. Depends on the application, of course, and that can help reduce and ensure security, build trust. It could even provide confidence into the whole system operating as end-to-end.
All right, thank you. I think we're on top of hour, right? So I'm in the process of concluding the discussion at the same time. So I'll give you like 30 seconds each of you on specific question, which is kind of like, the trends that's taking place, right? Based on your viewpoints or observation, where do you see the trends coming into play right now? Are we moving into more like advanced AI agentic, or is this advanced RAG concept, right? And then we're talking about like human-centered AI. So I think each one of you can take 30 seconds to give some insights there. So this could be helpful to our audience as well. And then we will wrap up.
Yeah, I'd say like just two quick ones. Like Anthropic released artifacts. It's like a cool way to interact with a model, and like there will be more and more innovative, creative ways to have humans in the loop, human pilots sort of managing AIs in the future. So excited for that. And then also just like better reasoning as a whole, I think is another trend.
Yeah, so definitely double-clicking on the importance of humans in the loop to audit throughout the process, and of course multimodal. So with an exclamation point, I think that's where it's headed.
Yeah, I think we'll see more open models and community getting involved in terms of building safety components, architectures on top of like these models, and incorporating them into like new frameworks that may not exist today. So I'm super excited about those.